18 days ago, I flew in on a charter flight to the airport down there, Kangerlussuaq, to join an expedition cruise on Hapag Lloyd around Greenland. This turned out to be an experience like no other that I have had, with ice beating us, incredible sights, twists and turns, and just an incredible experience, as you will find out right now. The first big twist came right after the muster drill. As we set sail at 8 p.m, the captain announced the itinerary I'd booked was being scrapped due to thick ice and bad weather. Instead of crossing to the Canadian Arctic first as planned, we would now stay in Greenland, sailing north and north and north, and he'd find new places to visit along the way until we could find somewhere to cross. But as you'll see, even those new plans kept hitting snags too. So how cold is it and how rough are the seas? So I'll tell you on the first morning, I'm underdressed. Clearly I need more of a hat and stuff. So it's definitely getting noticeably cold as we head a bit further north. I mean, yesterday it was quite warm, about 16. The seas though very, very calm. And I guess because we're sort of sailing in fjords and protected areas, so I'll keep you posted on that. After putting on layers, hat and a cozy blue parka supplied by the line, I headed back outside in time for this. The first signs of what was to come. This amazing iceberg, the first of many that we saw today. But as I discovered, icebergs like these were rather small scale versus what I got to see later. Early the next morning, the ship slowed to cautiously make our way through icebergs that were scattered all around Uummannaq, our first off-ship experience, a landing that had some rather unusual features that none of the others we did on the trip had, as I'll explain. Behind me is in the bay, just like a gazillion icebergs, and we're in this tiny little village. It's about 1,800 people, and it's a really important place for the Inuit community. They used to winter here. Now there's kind of more of a settlement here, and you've got a very beautiful church here. You've got an interesting museum with the history of the Greenlanders and people moving here, and there's a big fishing community. You might hear clanking and banging and stuff from that, and it's quite amazing. I mean, the scenery is just incredible out there. This landing had 4 unique things that others to come did not. First, we used the ship's tender boats, as Uummannaq had a place to dock, and all the others we had to use the Zodiacs. More on that shortly, as you'll see. Secondly, all 200 passengers could go on land here at the same time because we were visiting a settlement. In uninhabited places, only 100 of us were allowed on land at any one time. And well, the third and fourth differences I'll explain by showing you as they happened on that next call of the day. A stop, by the way, that was not on my booked itinerary, at Storoen. Storoen was a wet landing, which meant we got there in these Zodiac boats and we had to step off them into the water. So we were wearing boots, supplied by the line, by the way, and waterproof trouser covers, which I had to bring with me. There's an expedition team of 12 people, and while 6 are experts who gave talks on board and then are on hand when we're out and about to inform us about things like the weather, geology, wildlife, Inuit culture, the 6 others in that team, their roles came into play when we landed here in Storoen. And so one of the things that are very important when you're out in the Arctic is one of these guys behind me. There's a group of polar bear guards to watch out for polar bears, because of course it's kind of dangerous. So if polar bears kind of approach, then we all have to head back to the ship really quickly, because polar bears are very aggressive and are known to attack humans. So those guys are kind of quite important in the whole thing. So we're out on the second adventure, which is a hike to a iceberg graveyard. So this is the iceberg cemetery. It's a bay where icebergs kind of get caught, and it's rather spectacular. We haven't yet had as many little mosquitoes and bugs as we were warned, but I have noticed that quite a few of the experienced people in of the expedition team who are out at various points here, they've got their little nets on. I did buy some nets, and we'll see whether later on in the trip whether I need to do those. So I'm going to go and explore a little bit more of this amazing scenery. So I'm back on the ship, having done that walk, and I realized that there was a reason that the regulars had their protection stuff on for bugs, and I wish they'd warned us, because I'm now bitten like crazy on my head and my neck. So I'm all bundled up because I've just been outside. The temperature's fallen dramatically, so it's like 3 degrees after it was like 13 or so yesterday. And this is a sea day. We're heading 400 nautical miles further north, which is why the temperature's fallen so much. And we've got 3 lectures today. One around the weather, the second was around the whole ecology of the Arctic Circle, and the third is going to be about the Inuit people. And then we have the briefing for the next few days. So a little bit chilly. I'm going to go and head outside again. It's kind of also a little bit misty and foggy. Across the trip, we had at least 16 lectures by the expedition team, and most days there were recaps and briefings about next day's stop. Though often whatever we were briefed on was going to happen didn't come to pass the next day. Around 7 o'clock in the morning on day 5, I woke to find that we were gingerly sailing through fog to try to get to Cape York, some 400 miles north from that last call. So you may hear little crunches every now and again, which is ice kind of just crunching up against the hull of the ship. So we're currently sailing towards Cape York, and we're sailing through kind of sea ice which is broken up. Now last night on the briefing, the captain spoke about the ice because there's a lot of ice around still. So whether we can get that far north is still to be decided. You might see things like this sort of icebergs looming over there. You can see loads of sea ice over there. So some sort of jeopardy, but we'll sort it all out, I'm sure. Well, I was over optimistic. It was too foggy to sail safely there. So we turned around and headed to our next stop. That stop was Parker Snow Bay, which was not on the original itinerary that I booked. So I was concerned about how good or interesting it would be, but also hoping that this fog would lift, as we're not allowed on land if it has not lifted, because it's impossible to spot polar bears and the risk is too high. Well, as you can see, it's really sunny, blue skies, so massive big change from this morning when there was loads of fog. Even sailing in here, there was loads of fog, so it's really changeable. So you may be able to hear kind of a gush of water, and that's a stream that's flowing down into the fjord from these glaciers behind me. In about the 1850s, these glaciers that are behind me would have been right down to about here. 80% of Greenland is covered by a massive, thick ice field, and at some points it's 3.5 kilometers thick, and if it melted, the whole ocean would rise by 7 meters right around the world. So off this big ice shield, you have glaciers which then push down through the valleys and the fields and the fjords, create the fjords. And because of gravity, they just keep moving. So they're like rivers of ice. So hiking up here has been kind of interesting because you're walking on like permafrost, which means that it's almost like walking on a spongy carpet. So it's actually quite hard going. But anyway, I've got to go and climb much further up there, and I'm going to get left behind if I don't keep moving. Well, I didn't get left behind, and after the hike, it was time to head back to the ship as the next set of guests headed onto land to have their turn hiking Parker Snow Bay. Early the next morning, I bundled up warm and headed out onto the bow of the ship to see us arrive at the ice border. Last night, the captain told us he was going to keep heading north to get here to what is more or less the start of solid sea ice to the North Pole, and we're going to spend the day trying to push through it, hoping to spot polar bears because they hunt on this ice. But he warned that the ice chart suggested the ice may prove too thick for us to get very far. We're pushed really far north. I think we're about 77 degrees north, and we're now hit with the ice. We've actually just pushed a little bit into the ice floe here, and you see these little pools of clear water, which means that it's sort of starting to melt a bit, but it's quite something. And so the ship is ice class, which means it can push into some of the ice. It's not an icebreaker, so it can't break through into deep ice as such. So it's very atmospheric, kind of a little bit foggy and whatnot. So we're spending a day now looking at the ice, hopefully finding things like polar bears, stuff like that. But that was not to be, and the captain and the expedition leader had to find an alternative. And as you can probably tell, we're no longer in the ice because the pack ice coming out from the north was too thick. It was about 2 meters thick, and although we tried to push through, couldn't really get through. So we've come to a place which is really, really weird and interesting all together. So there's the Dundas mountain over there, which some people have climbed. This is an old sort of hunting area. Also, it's a really important area around here for the Inuit people. However, in the 1950s, a massive air base was built during the Cold War by the Americans. This base was called the Thule Air Base, and apparently it had up to 20,000 Marines there at one time, and it was designed really because it's sort of a midpoint between the US and Russia at the time. It was a way of kind of identifying if there was going to be any ballistic missiles coming, and it's now really more focused on tracking kind of activity in space, and again warning for ballistic missiles and so on. But it also was a reminder of just how badly the local people, the Inuit people, were treated. So for example, they were given 4 days. Now bear in mind they've been here for, I guess, forever. They were given 4 days to vacate the area, and through this whole trip you've been learning about how badly the people were treated. Now while this call was another unscheduled and last minute itinerary change, it did unexpectedly make the next stop even more poignant. Just after 8:30 this morning, it was my turn to head across on the Zodiacs into this town. This is both interesting and kind of a bit sad in two ways. So we're in Qaanaaq now, which has a population of about 650 people. This was only established in the early 1950s when the Inuit people had to move from when they were building the Thule air base. So this now is sort of a hunting, fishing kind of village, and it is actually the northernmost city in Greenland, but I will talk a little bit about the northernmost settlement a little bit later on. But anyway, let's go and explore Qaanaaq. In the community hall there was quite an interesting mix of things going on. So there was Alex Perry, who is a relative of a famous explorer, a young guy. He has blue eyes, he's the only Inuit with blue eyes, and he spoke all about hunting, and he's really quite inspiring. He's a young guy, he has Parkinson's, but refuses to leave his community to go to Denmark to kind of get some treatment and medication he would need. He loves the community so much, so that was quite something. Also there's lots of kind of curios and bits and pieces there, mostly made out of kind of little glass beads, but lots of kind of work going in. And then they did sort of some drum dancing. There was so much to see in this small town. A museum telling the story of hunting, a quaint church that is immaculately kept, and interacting with the rather excitable Greenland sled dog. These are pups and they're all around the town. However, soon it was time to head back to the ship and to head to our next stop. But that took way longer than was scheduled because the sea ice in the bay to get there was still really thick and the ship had to force our way through. We did though finally get to Siorapaluk. This is the northernmost permanent settlement in Greenland. Just 65 people live here, mostly part of an extended family who are hunters and they're fishers, and the signs of all that: carcasses, polar bear skins and bones dotted all around. It is a small and slightly quirky church, totally isolated during the winter when it's only reachable by helicopter. Quite a few people have asked me about what's the key difference between sort of the Arctic, Greenland and Antarctica, and I think this is a really good example of one key difference, which is settlements. So this is the northernmost settlement in the whole of Greenland, and it has about 65 people. It's a hunting community. But what you don't have in Antarctica is settlements of people. You'll find some old abandoned whaling stations and some research centres. You don't have indigenous people that have lived and living there actively, kind of, living a life, fending for themselves. That's one key difference. So one important difference, of course, is polar bears you get in the Arctic, penguins you get down in Antarctica. So if you ever see a Christmas card which has got penguins and polar bears on, that isn't just nonsense, complete nonsense. After a walk on the gorgeous beach with mountains and a glacier in the distance, I headed back to the ship. Once everyone was back on board, the captain told us the ice was melted enough for us to cross Baffin Bay to explore the Canadian Arctic. So many of the Greenland cruises, like the one that I'm actually on, come across the Canadian Arctic, and visit really remote places as you do in Greenland. And although I'm going to focus on Greenland, it's worth just mentioning the Canadian Arctic is pretty special as well. And this is actually where we've seen, so far anyway, the most polar bears. I think we've seen about 7 of them now. Of course, they're quite far away. They can be as much as a kilometre away, so you need a really good, strong lens. This morning we saw, setting in here, we saw a mother and a baby, so that was kind of special. You see another side of the Inuit community and understand some of the differences. The scenery is even more kind of rugged, so you have these massive big cliffs and things. So it is definitely worth, if you've got the time, looking at the Canadian Arctic extension. After a rather rocky crossing back to Greenland across Baffin Bay, we visited Ilulissat, one of the best known and most visited towns in Greenland. I had no idea there was a UNESCO World Heritage Site here, and just how remarkable a site it was, as you will see. After a short zodiac ride into the town past the first and only other cruise ship that I'd seen on the whole trip so far, we entered the picturesque harbour, jam-packed with small fishing boats. I jumped off, went on the cruise line's bus transfer to the Isafjord Visitor Centre, and then headed down off a sign-posted path. So looming out the mist just behind me is the most remarkable sight. It looks like it's a glacier, but in reality it's floating icebergs, huge big chunks of ice that have broken off the Greenland ice field. They get pushed down here, but because it's really shallow here, they basically get grounded and stuck. And this is one of the most popular places to come and visit because of this incredible ice field, as it's called. I mean, it really is quite something. So it's about a 1.5 kilometre sort of walk on these wooden pathways to get there. So let's go and take a look and explore this amazing ice field. It is just mind-boggling. They said to us it would be incredible, but it is just mind-boggling. Massive glaciers break off the Greenland ice field at the end of Isafjord, over 70 kilometres from here. The fjord is around 700 metres deep until it gets here, where it narrows to about 200 metres deep. The giant icebergs are so big they get stuck, creating a 70-kilometre iceberg traffic jam all the way down the fjord. After that incredible sight and a quick look around the town, I hurried back to the ship as we were due to set sail for the afternoon activity, which was a zodiac ride around the icebergs in Disko Bay, after basically the icebergs finally melt enough and make their way past that blockage. Another stunning sight. Ilulissat, Disko Bay, and our next stop were all on the original itinerary I'd booked, by the way. And as those first two were so amazing, I was really looking forward to the next one. However, it was memorable, but for the wrong reason. This port had one thing that no other place we had called at in Greenland, or in fact the Canadian Arctic, had, but that wasn't really a plus. We're in probably, and I apologise to the people who live here, one of the least interesting places we've been to, which is Sisimiut. Again, like Ilulissat, it has about 10% of the total population of Greenland, so about 5,500 people. And I think one of the key reasons we're stopping here is it's sort of on the way back to Kangerlussuaq, which is where we embark and disembark. But also importantly, it's probably the only place that the ship can actually dock. So here is where it's taken on fuel. It's got rid of kind of waste and taken on all of the supplies. So I suspect the real reason we're here is because it's where they can basically restock. There is, though, actually quite an interesting museum, which is just here. It's a series of buildings, old kind of historical buildings. And in there it is quite interesting because it tells the story of how this evolved from like a whaling, hunting village into kind of a more fishing village. And it's one of the important centres of fishing and fishing processing and that kind of stuff. I've been asked a lot about the weather, temperatures, that kind of stuff. So as you can see, it's a little bit rainy here. So the warmest it's been was 15 degrees Celsius, which is actually when we embarked in Kangerlussuaq, which was a very unusual temperature. And the lowest it got on the trip, the captain told us, is minus 2 degrees Celsius. But most days it kind of ranged between 2 or 3 degrees Celsius up to about 8 or 9 degrees Celsius, probably about 10 degrees Celsius here in Sisimiut. Anyway, so the ship could only be docked for a certain amount of time, and now it's gone out and it's sort of moored in the bay. So I'm going to actually go and head back to the ship. Once back on board, I had time to reflect about my trip. Having my booked itinerary scrapped could have made for a terrible trip. But as you've seen, Far from that, as Greenland was fascinating, no matter where we eventually went and had to go. However, it does show that expedition cruising has many surprises and things that you only really find out about once you're on board, because the lines tend to downplay them. So join me in this video where I explain all of them, starting with the one that definitely causes the most dismay. See you over there.